This is Gemara and Yoma Daf Nun. All the learning for this month, the month of Sivan, has been sponsored as a special shidduch for Yisrael Chaim and Devaira Mir Tashem. The learning of the entire Chabura should be a tremendous chos that you should have clarity and a shidduch all going bekarev. Of course, all the chilim Rivka Bas Vashav and Haftal Yisrael Michal Esther, Amen. Veiga Chaim Azar Sham Sivan Yisrael Zar Bas Kenan Didi Bas Nims Chaysay Yisrael Mindol Aliyah Devarin Jalei Shomaz Naomi Vashav Sheikhana Shmo Mantir Nim Chan Yisrael Chaim Yisrael Rochas Tavam Musa Dinainu V'Shin Mindas Sim Chotavi Ben Sivan Vegas V'Yod V'Chal Yisrael Hu Ben Achamendament Taiba V'Say Shar Chali Yisrael Tzvaz Chashirach Vataleya Bas Ita. Again, apologies about a bit lateness of today's shir. Yesterday, Baruch Hashem, we made a bris, and Amir Hashem, we should be back on board, starting with the Daf Nun Aleph. So we're in the middle of a discussion over here with the din of the par, or the damai shel par, as the Gemara coined it. But before we get there, I just wanted to show a few pictures that I found in the Mesifta, which relate to the top of Daf Mem Tes. As you see over here, this is the Kohen Gadol holding the kaf, the spoon, with the keteiros inside of it. Now the question is, how does he get this kaf into his hands? Again, he walked into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he has the machata of the coals, he has the kaf with the keteiros. Then he puts the machata on the floor, now he has to get this kaf with the keteiros back into his two hands. Chayfen v'chayzer v'chayfen. The question is, how does he do that? So one shot is that he takes it in his mouth. Over here you'll see the other way. This is what the Gemara was talking about on top of the Amid, as the Gemara said, if you see, he takes it with his finger tips, and now you see what he's going to do is he's going to slide it backwards. He slides back the spoon slowly and ever meticulously towards his arm, and then under his arm, of course, because he can't drop one little dot, and then once it's there, he's going to tilt it directly into his hands, and that's how we'll successfully, one of the avodas kashish of a migdash, be able to transfer the keteiros from the spoon back into his hand without losing any bit. Now we pick up with today's discussion, which is a continuation of yesterday's discussion, which was 5 lines from the wide lines and Mem Tes and Beis. We said a question: Shachat umeis. The Kohen Gadol shechs the carbon, his par, and then the Kohen Gadol unfortunately is nifter. Can the next Kohen Gadol, when the scan takes over, can he take the blood that was already from that carbon and bring it in? We said it's a fundamental shayla when the Torah says par, does it include the damai shel par or not? And we had a machlokes, as you see highlighted on the first white line, between Rav Ami and Rav Yitzchak. It's also machlokes in Rav Chanina and Rish Lakish. Rav Ami said par and not the damai shel par, and Rav Yitzchak said bepar and afilu bedamai shel par. The Gemara asked the question. Rav Ami asked Rav Yitzchak, who said you could use the blood. He asked for the din of carbon Pesach, that if the din is, and again, let's just explain one detail. Everything here is going to boil down to that when the Torah said the word par, did that word par include damai shel par? Did that word par include dead animal? Did that word par only include live, living par? That's going to be the discussion. According to Rav Yitzchak, for example, that he says even damai shel par, he's learning that when the Torah says par, included in par is after shechita, dead animal, blood of par. So he said, but we see for the carbon Pesach, we see not that way. Because we see by the carbon Pesach, it says until you're allowed to register until it's shechted. So we see that it's only called the carbon. It's only called the seh while it's alive. According to Rav Yitzchak, you can even do it until you have the blood, until you have the zrika. And we answered miyais miseh mechayusai deseh, a special xeris kasiv. Says the mechayus deseh. Says the Gemara Masim Marzucha, 4 lines from the bottom. Ein baidim lo be'egav lo b'chayav lo b'shchuta lo b'shev lo b'klayim lo b'klay ela b'seh. When it comes to baidim the Peter Chamar, what animals are you able to use? Says the Gemara, you can't use a calf, a chaya, undomesticated animal, a shchuta, very important, a shchuta. Once the seh or the gedi, once the animals are shechted, they lose their status, and you no longer can use them as the redemption, which of course is going to be the question. Says the Gemara, ela b'seh. So what do we see? We see seemingly when the Torah says the word seh, it has to be a living animal. According to you, Rav Rav Yitzchak, it could be even after it's living, after it's dead, because you included Damai Shel Seh. Answers the Gemara, Shiny Asam, the Aleph says, Semi Pesach. No, it's a special din we learned out similar to Pesach. Says the Gemara, 1 second, if you're learning out from Pesach, maybe you should have all the dinim of the garment Pesach. Has to be 1 year old, has to be male, has to have not of a blemish. Says the Gemara, Tifteh. No, from the fact that it says by the Pidyon Petik Chamar, Tifteh, that comes to include. So on one hand, as we've seen so many times, we have Tifteh coming to include. We have Seh coming to limit. So the Seh limits that it can't be a dead animal, and Tifteh includes, does not only have to be a male, a 1 year old, and no blemish. Tifteh Riba. Ask the Gemara, Tifteh Riba, Afilu Kulu Nami. So it should include everything. We had a Mishnah that said, Lo Be'egel, Lo B'chayel, Lo Shchuta, Lo Trevel, Lo Klayim, Lo Koyel, Lo Koi. Why? If we have a Riboy, it should include everything. Answers the Gemara, Mkain Seh, My Mahanile. If you included everything, then the word Seh wouldn't do anything, and therefore that is the balance. On one hand, it's equated to Karban Pesach, on the other hand, it is limited. And that is how Rav Yitzchak defends his position. Now the Gemara flips. Eisvei Rav Yitzchak Nafcha l'Rav Ami. Rav Nafka asked Rav Ami. Again, Rav Ami said that it has to be only the animal. It cannot be the blood. So if we're going to ever find an instance where the Torah says an animal, a para, etc., and refers even to a dead animal, that's a kasha on Rav Ami. Because according to Rav Ami, once the animal is dead, once we only have the blood, it's not included in par. Because again, Rav Ami said you have to bring specifically the living animal, and therefore when the Kohen died, of course, it's always going to be the ripple effect part of this discussion. And therefore, when the Kohen died, the next Kohen cannot bring his blood. But the fundamental detail that we have to understand is when the Torah says an animal, does it mean specifically a living animal, or is it even the dead animal? So Rav Ami says specifically the living animal. Let's see. So what does the Torah say? Yes, kol apar. It said that you should remove the entire par, the entire bull. What do we see from over here? We see from over here. This, as Rashi points out, let's get the Rashi visible over here. This, as Rashi points out, is referring to a par that is shechted when a Kohen Gadol made a mistake, and he should have to get karis, etc. But what do we see? That he takes out the par. The Torah calls it par. What's it referring to? Even the shechted animal. Question Rav Ami. Rav Ami said that once the animal is shechted, once you only have the blood, it's not called par. Answers the Gemara, no. Rav Ami explains sheyotzi is kulai. That's a special drush. You have to remove the entire animal, but it's not going to be a question on me. Ask Rav Yitzchak Nafka further. Vesparachatos. That Torah says, and the parachatos, vesirachatos, and the Torah says, and the zirachatos. Again, here the psukim as well, referring to shechted animals, even though they're labeled as par and seir, according to Rav Ami. It should not be, because you learn that when the Torah says animal, par, bull, seir, that it only refers to the living animal, not the shechted animal. Amar Rapapa defends Rav Ami, ba'or ubeseh uperesh tekuli amaloi pligi. Says Rav Papa, let's get something straight over here. When it comes to the hides of the animal, when it comes to the meat of the animal, when it comes to the perished intestines, even Rav Ami agrees that is called par, that is called goat, that is called the animal even after it's dead. When it again refers to specifically the hide, the meat, and the intestines. What's the machlokes Rav Ami and Rav Yitzchak Nafcha? So Rav Papa just came along and he took yesterday's disagreement and he's shrinking it. Says Rav Papa ki bligi bidam mar savar dam ikri par mar savar dam lo ikri par. Rav Yitzchak Nafcha says the dam is called par, and if you could bring it, Rav Ami says no. Amar Rav Ashi says Rav Ashi mistavra k'man damar par ikri dam. Rav Ashi weighs in and he says it's logical according to the opinion that says dam Ikri par, the shita of Rav Yitzchak Nafcha, the chsiv, as the Torah says, b'zois yavay aron al kodesh. With this, Aaron has to come into the Kodesh. Atu Bepar ben Bakar. The pasuk concludes he has to come to the Kodesh with the par. Atu Bekarne Mayole. Does the Kohen Gadol walk into the Kodesh with the animal on his horse? Of course not. Elabidama. It goes in with the dam. Vekari le par. And yet it's called par. So what do we see clearly, says the Gemara? We see like Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, that par ikri dam. That the Torah says, bring the par in. And what does it refer to? It doesn't say bring the whole animal and go charge in to the Kodesh HaKodashim. It means bring in the dam, the blood of the par. Ve'edoch. How does Rav Ami explain? It seems like a Gavaldik Araya. Ve'edoch. B'ma hochshar Aaron lavay kodesh. It just means it's figurative. With what prepares, enables Aaron to go into the Kodesh HaKodash with par ben bakar lechatas. But it does not mean that you can actually bring in the blood. And that is the conclusion between the Machlekes Nafcha and Rav Ami, whether par ikri dam. Now the Gemara just goes for a moment that what exactly? Now let's go back. Now we're going to go back and tie up loose ends. How do we get into this discussion? Because we had a shaila. Kohen Gadol shechs the par, and then the Kohen Gadol is nifter. Can the next Kohen bring the blood? Says the Gemara. But I'll tell you a different reason why the next Kohen cannot bring the blood. You got involved around here, whether the din of the par, whether the din of the dam is called par, and therefore can this guy bring it? Says the Gemara. I'll tell you a different problem. It's a din of a chatas, that our owner dies, and the halacha is it has to be put to death, and therefore, of course, the next kohen cannot bring it. Forget whether dam is called par or not. There's a totally different issue. The halacha is when the owner of a chatas dies, it's done. That animal has to go out and graze and get a mum and die, and no one else can bring that as a carbon. Amar le Ravin baravad le Rava Amri Talmidei Amar Rav Amram Chatos Sibor Hi. No, this case is different. The par, the bull of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur, has the din of a chatzah sibur. It's a din that is being brought for himself, for all the kohanim, and therefore v'lo lemisa asla. Before we continue, let's just point out that there's something very unique about this par, which is going to be the reason why the Gemara now is going to, be trying to figure out exactly what's going on. The uniqueness is that the par came, something that we've learned in the past, came from the money of the Kohen Gadol. It was his animal, but it's being brought as an atonement for himself and for all the Kehanim. So on one hand, it has an element of a carbon yachid, a personal carbon. The other hand, it has an element, of course, of carbon tzibur. It's being brought for everyone else. And that's really what's going to go on, as we'll see in a few minutes. Says the Gemara, so Rav Baravada answered, no, there's no problem of chata shemesu ba'leha. Why? Because we're referring to a carbon sibur, and he proves that Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, the par in Yom Kippur, the chavitim, which we know is a special carbon mincha, the Kohen Gadol brought every day. Kohen Hadi brought once in his life. Upesach the carbon yachadu. V'doiches Shabbos. Omar loy Rameir. Omar loy means Rameir is talking to someone and says Omar loy Rameir. Rameir says to Tanakama, these three carbonis have a din of a carbon yachid. Yet they're Deicha Shabbos Vesatoma. What could we infer from the fact that it's Omar loy? Rameir says, let me tell you something. These carbonis have a din of carbon yachid. What does that show us? Lam nechlal. What did the Tanakama hold? So says Rav Baravad, I have a raya that the par is a din of a carbon sibur for the fact that the Rameir counter to the Tanakama, it's called the carbon yachid, must be the Tanakama holds like me, Rav Baravad, that's a carbon sibur. Says Rava, 1 second. Really, again, this is Rav Bar Rav Ada said to Rava. So Rava responds, according to your reasoning, Tikatani, let's go to a different brisa. What did the brisa say? Oh, Amar Loi, Rav Yaakov, this sounds very familiar. Amar Loi, Rav Yaakov talks back to the Tanakama. Valei par elam davar shel tzibur, par for when the entire Klal Yisrael did Avera, usiri avodas chavim, or for when everyone worshipped idols. V'chagiv the carbon tzibur vein they're not doichel Shabbos Toma. Michlal, are you going to infer now that because Rav Yaakov said that these have a din of a carbon sibur, the Ikelaman the Amar the Yachid? Are you going to tell me that Rav Yaakov is talking to someone, and if he said that as a din of a carbon sibur, it must be someone else holds the din of a carbon Yachid? Is that really what you hold? It can't be. These are par helim davar shel tzibur, a par avodas kachavim of the tzibur. They're clearly carbonate tzibur. So why would you think because it's Amar Live the Tanakama must hold the opposite? Ella, what are you going to have to explain both this price of Rav Yaakov and the previous price of Rav Meir? They're talking back to the Tanakama. What does that mean? They heard that the Tanakama held that a carbon sibur is deicha Shabbos and deicha toma push away toma. The carbon yachid in a deicha Shabbos is a toma. It's not push away either. And on the detail that only a communal carbon pushes off Shabbos and toma, not a private carbon. Amrlei Rameir, carbon yachid, klalu. Are you telling me it's a rule, ironclad, every carbon yachid is not daicha? How could you say that? V'haloi par Yoma Kippurim v'chavite yokain gadol u'pesach, the carbon yachid these are carbon yachid. It's brought from the kohen gadol's own money, and yet v'daicha as a Shabbos as a tama. That's Rav Meir's counter to the Tanakama. V'amrlei Rav Yaakov, and Rav Yaakov's counter is carbon tzibur klalu. He countered from the other angle. Each one attacks. Says Rav Yaakov, you're going to tell me carbon tzibur klalu is always daicha? V'haloi par l'davar shel tzibur. See, but it's chavim v'chagig the carbon tzibur vein daicha lo as a Shabbos as a tama. So says Rava back, do not infer from that which Rav Yaakov and Rav Meir said back to Tanakama. It does not necessarily prove to us that the par, or din of the animal, is a din of a carbon tzibur, and therefore you do not have a raya to that which you Rav Amrim want us to say. You do not have a raya that has a din of a carbon tzibur. Ella, says the Gemara. Ella, concluding that which we just said. Ella noikid haiklal biyarcha. Rather, the end of what we just said. What do Rav Meir and Rav Yaakov hold? Ella noikid haiklal biyarcha. Kol shezmanay, meaning, I stopped the drop earlier. Rav Yaakov and Rav Meir are middle of firing back at the Tanakama. The Tanakama said a carbon sibur is deicha Shabbos and toma. A carbon yachid is not. Rav Yaakov and Rav Meir each added proof that which the Tanakama said is incorrect. Rav Yaakov proved it from the fact that a parallel davar shel sibur and avodas chavim are carbon sibur and not doiche. Rav Meir proved it from the par of Yom Kippur, which is a carbon yachid and is yes doiche. So both Rav Yaakov and Rav Meir conclude their question on the Tanakama. This is the rule. It all is a din whether it's Zman Kavua or not. If it has a set time, it has to be today. Or Korban Pesach, the Paran Yom Kippur, it must be today. Then it's going to be Deicha whether it's Sibur or not. Whereas if it doesn't have a set time, it will never be Deicha. And therefore, that's how the Gemara concludes that we do not have a proof whether the din of the par of the Kohen Gadol is the din of a Korban Sibur or not. So now we can have a few more questions. So Rava was of the opinion that the par Yom Kippur does not have a din of a par of a carbon tzibur. So Esvei Abaye asks Rava on that detail, on the detail that you Rava hold that the par of Yom Kippur does not have a din of a carbon tzibur. Par v'sir shel Yom Kippur. The par and the seer of Yom Kippur, what happened? Sha'avdu, you lost the animals. Vehefresh acherim tachteim, you lost them. We don't know where they went. They ran away. So they found another carbon in their place. And then, of course, as always happens, you then, after you bring the second ones, the original animal is found. What's the halacha? Kulum, all the original animals, kulam yamusu, have to be put to death, left to die. V'chein, and similarly, sirab is chavim sha'avdu v'efresh acherim tachterem, kulam yamusu, devi Rav Yehuda. That's Rav Yehuda's opinion. Rav Elazar, Rav Shimon, Aimrim, what do Rav Elazar, Rav Shimon say? Yiru ashi yistavu, no, you don't just leave them to die, rather you let them graze until they get a mom, v'yimkru, you sell them, yiblu demain l'nadava, and their money goes as they done the dava, a voluntary offering to the Beis HaMikdash. Why? She'ein chatas sibur misa. She'os chatas sibur is not left to die. So what do we see? What were those final 5 words? She'ein chatas sibur mesa. 4 words, excuse me. That a chatas sibur is not mesa. What's the case of the brisa? A par, we're talking about the par of Yom Kippur, and it calls it a karban sibur. Asabayi to Rava, you called it a karban yachid. Answers Rava, Amar Lei, my par. What did the brisa mean par? Didn't say par Yom Kippur, it said par. You know what it meant? It meant par elam davar shel tzibur. All it meant to refer to is the par elam davar shel tzibur if the Torah Klal still doesn't have Eira and has to bring a special par. That's what it's referred to, and that of course is indeed a karban tzibur. Says the Gemara 1 second. V'ashal Yom Kippurim ketani. But the brisa did say par v'sayir shel Yom Kippurim. It said it is of Yom Kippur. So what's going on over here? Answers Rava, Kikatani, what did the word Shal Yom Kippurim mean? Adisair. It's going back on the word Seir, but not on the word Par. So it's a Seir of Yom Kippur, but not the Par. Aiva Tanya Par Shal Yom Kippurim, Visir Shal Yom Kippurim. There's a brayse that speaks out explicitly the Par of Yom Kippur, the Seir of Yom Kippur. Sha'ov, do forever Shachem Tachtehem, Kulam Yamu Sivir of Yud, Revel Etzer Shimon Aimrim, Yeroashi is top of Yom Kuv Yiblu Demeim the Nadava, Sheikhat Sibra Mesa. So we have a brayse that speaks it out explicitly. They're referring to a karban par of Yom Kippur, and it says it's karban sibur. Answers Rava, Loi Tema. Do not say she'ein chata sibur mesa. That's not what the brayse meant. Elaima she'ein chatos hashotfim mesa. Didn't mean sibur as in communal. It meant shotfim. Anytime you're more than one person, then it's not left to die. Rather, you let it graze. That was Rav Shimon's taina. But you do not see that the par of Yom Kippur is called a par sibur. Rather, it's called a par shotfim. Says the Gemara, my nafkamino. Who cares? You're calling it shotfim. You're calling it sibur. Says the Gemara, Deloy mesu. You know what the reason is? The difference is Kahanim did not bring because the case was they did not bring a par el davar shel tzibur. Rashi explains a little bit more at depth, but we're running a little bit slow on time, so let's move on. Ta Shema says the Gemara Dabai Rav Eliezer. Ask Rav Eliezer the following question as we turn over to Nun Amid Beis. Ledivrei ha'oimer par Yom Kippurim karban yachid. According to the Man Amar that holds that a par Yom Kippur is a karban yachid, the opinion of Abaye. Oiseh temura or ein oiseh temura. A fundamental shayla. Can it be used for temura or can it be not used for temura? Says the Gemara. Lav mechlal te'ika lemanta amar tetzibur. Again, lots of mechlals today. Lots of statements that show what the other opinion holds. Says the Gemara, we see a brisa. Brisa says, does a par in Yom Kippur, it's a karban yachid, can it do temura or not? Says the Gemara, we see very clearly, there must be someone else who holds it's not a karban yachid. That's karban sibur. Says the Gemara, Rava, you have a problem, because you do not hold it's a karban sibur. Answers the Gemara, lo, that's not what it means. Michlal, the equal, man damer, this shotfim. Again, the same thing that we just said, that it's not a din of a karban tzibur, rather it's a din of a karban shotvim. Says the Gemara, okay, Kufa, let's go into this shayla a little bit more at depth. Why Rav Elazar? What was Rav Elazar? Shayla divrei amir pariyim mikumi karban yachid. Oiseh temura, ein oiseh temura. Can it be used for a temura or not? My kabai mibayile. What exactly was Rav Elazar's question that he was bothered whether it could be used for a temura or not? And as you see Rashi in the second line, Rashi says, Avadai pshitol andecha v'kayanim mischabrim boy. V'karban hashotvin ein oiseh temura. My misafkele b'gavei. It's pashit. What exactly is his question? Meaning, even if the kohen gadol brings the animal from his own money. Like we said, there's a unique detail going on over here. We have the par that's brought in one hand from his own money, but it's brought for everyone else. But of course, it gets kapara for everyone. So once we know that a karban of shutfim cannot be used for temura, it should be pashit that this animal at some level is called a karban of shutfim, and therefore should not be allowed to be used for temura. Again, temura is at any time that you have to swap an animal because the animal animal became tummy or so on, and you have to swap it, you have to remove the kedusha from A to B, which is not allowed to be done, and then you have to get a kapara for that, you have to get an atonement. So says the Gemara, it should be very, very clear. It should be very clear that it can be not used, because the din is any carbon of shotfim cannot be used for tamura. And if this carbon, very good, the kohen pays from it from his own money, and it's used as a kapara from all the kehanim, for sure has at least a din of a carbon shotfim. So what exactly was Rav Elazar's shaila? Says the Gemara, Ibasar makdish azlinan, ibasar mischaper azlinan. Okay, now you're talking. The question was, does it go by the makdish, the kohen gadol, it's from his own money, so that's a carbon yachid, or does it go by the miskaper, all the other kohanim that it gets a kabara? Says the Gemara, no way, that can't be the question. Pshita, the basar mischaper azlinan. Of course it goes by those getting the kabara. Amrav Yichna, makdish ma'isef chaimish, v'mischaper, that the makdish, the one that adds on, the one that is makdish, consecrates an animal. What's the halacha? He has to add on a fifth when he redeems it. Of course, it's referring to when you're makdish or carbon for someone else. Then the halacha is, like Rashi says, makdish be'imasli latzis be'chaveiroi chayva shalav ha-makdish have bailim nidin taisefes chaymesh. You're considered the owner and you have to add on the extra fifth. So therefore, what? The makdish ma'asev chaymesh, v'amischaber, the one that gets the kabara, oiseba temura. He is the one who affects the temura onto another animal. And let's say there's a case where one separates truma from his produce for for someone else. He's the one that gets to choose who gets the money. This is a separate din. This we're quoting at the end of the Braisa, that if someone wants to remove truma from part A to part B, and the part B is someone else, it's a beautiful thing you're doing, but the one that gives away that truma, he gets the taivas anah. He gets the right to choose which kohen it's going to go to. So what do we see very clear? We see that the person that gets the kapara is considered the owner with regard to the temura. Why? It said v'amischaber oiseba temura. So very clearly in our case of this par, if all the kehanim, all the family of the kehanim are getting a kapara, it's clearly a par of all the kehanim. So therefore it's pasha that you cannot make temura on it. What again was Rav Elazar's shaila? Says the Gemara, la'ilam shitalei the basar mischaper azlinan. Really, we go. You're right, like you just said. It goes by all the kehanim. V'hachi kami b'ile. This was the shaila. Echav ha'kehanim b'kviusa mischapri oidilma b'kufya mischapri. What are the mechanics? How does this work? Is this considered like all the Kohanim have a kviyas in the carbon? Or is it considered bekufya? They're merely like a sidebar, they're merely a second fiddle over here, but they're not considered a kviyas. What's the difference? The difference is that the whole din of Tamura, again, we're trying to bring this din into a different din. That the whole din, whether you could use this for Tamura or not, is only if you're a kviyas, if you're considered a real registered owner, partner in this animal, then it cannot be used for Tamura. But if the halacha is, really it's my animal, happens to be there's some other sidebar parties over here, there's a few other people that got involved, but they're not really shotfim, they don't have a registered stake in the carbon, then we could, yes, use Tamura. That was Rav Elazar's shaila. So finally, now we figured out the shaila. Tashma says, Gemara, chaymer bezevach mi betamura. There's a din that's more chamer when it comes to regular carbon than by Tamura. V'chaymer betamura mi bezevach. Chaymer bezevach, why a regular carbon is more chamer? Why? Shazevach, noi biyachid, kibbutz, singular person like public. V'doichas ha-Shabbos v'zatoma, v'oiset Tamura. V'doichas ha-Shabbos v'zatoma, v'oiset Tamura. And you could use it for Tamura, again, that if you have one animal and you swapped it off for another animal as a substitute carbon, it could be used as a Tamura. Masha enkein b'Tamura. Tamura is more chamer. Chamer b'Tamura mi b'zevach. That's why is there more as a chamer that way. Sha Tamura chala al balmum. The Tamura works on a balmum. Kavua, a real balmum. Ve'ena yoytze lechulin, and it's not called lechulin. Ligazes in order to shear it, leave to work it with him. Masha enkein b'zevach, a regular carbon. So says the Gemara after this lengthy brisa, Hi Zebach Echi Dami, what is the case of this carbon? Ilema di Yachid, if it's a carbon Yachid, Midach Shabbos, the brisa said it's Teicha Shabbos, it stuck those words in. Is the carbon Yachid Teicha Shabbos? Vitoma Zedeicha Toma? Ela did Tzibur. It must be referring to a carbon Tzibur. But you know what I could say? What do you mean? Mia said Tamura, but there's no Tamura of a carbon Tzibur. Ela Lav, it must be talking about the unique time where you have a carbon Yachid, which is Teicha Shabbos and Toma. What is that? Ela Lav de Par. Teicha Shabbos is a Toma. There could be a Leizman because it has a set time. That's the reason it's Teicha Shabbos and Toma. And what do we see? Va'oi said Tamura. We see it can be used for a Tamura, the carbon Yachidu. So we see a clear raya as a din of a carbon Yachid. It can be used for a Tamura. So Brisa says it's Teicha Shabbos and Teicha Toma, even though it's a carbon Yachid. So we seemingly see it can be used as a Toma. And the Gemara fires back. Amar Rav Sheshes, and we'll finish with this. Loi. Ve'eloi shel Aroin. We're referring to Aroin's Oila, the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. That is what we are referring to, and now the Gemara is going to prove why this is logical. Tomorrow we'll pick up with this final raya, and then we'll move forward.